Frida, a decent black woman who got married to a wealthy white man, got heart attack in the courtroom after her son was convicted for killing his father. Here's what happened. It was past midnight when the pounding on the door shattered the silence in Frida Smith's home. The small house, modest but cozy, was suddenly filled with flashing red and blue lights. Frida, startled awake, rushed to the door, her heart racing. Outside, police officers stood with grim faces, their hands hovering near their holstered weapons. "Mrs. Smith," one of them said, his voice cold and formal, "we're here to arrest your son, Tyson Smith, for the murder of Donald Smith." Frida froze, gripping the doorframe for support. "Murder? My son? What are you talking about?" she stammered. "Tyson would never. He loved his father." Before she could get another word out, Tyson, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, stepped into the room. "Mom, it's okay," he said, his voice steady though his face was pale. "I didn't do anything. I'll clear this up." The officers grabbed him roughly, handcuffing him as Frida cried out. "Wait, you can't do this. He's innocent," she screamed, but her pleas fell on deaf ears. Tyson was hauled out into the night as neighbors peeked from their windows, murmuring about the scandal. Donald Smith had been a man of stature and influence, a wealthy white businessman who built his empire from the ground up. His life, however, was far from simple. Years ago, he had married Frida, a beautiful and intelligent black woman who brought warmth and vibrancy to his life. Together, they had Tyson, their only son. But as William's business grew, so did his ego. The strain on his marriage to Frida eventually led him to take a second wife, Samantha, a young, ambitious white woman whose charm masked her greed. While Frida remained in the family home, focusing on raising Tyson, Samantha slowly integrated herself into William's business and personal affairs, positioning herself as his confidant. Frida never trusted Samantha. Her instincts told her the woman had ulterior motives, but William dismissed her concerns, seeing only Samantha's loyalty, or what he thought was loyalty. Over time, Samantha's influence grew, creating a rift between Frida and William. The courtroom was packed with spectators and reporters on the day of Tyson's arraignment. Frida sat in the front row, clutching a photograph of her son. Her face was a mask of composure, but her trembling hands betrayed her fear. Across the room, Samantha sat with a tissue in hand, dabbing at non-existent tears. The judge's gavel came down, silencing the murmurs in the room. "We are here today to address the charges against Tyson Smith for the murder of Donald Smith," the judge announced. But it wasn't Samantha's name or her accusations that had brought this case to trial so quickly. It was Patricia Smith, William's elderly mother. Patricia had demanded swift justice for her son, convinced by Samantha's claims that Tyson was a vengeful son who had killed his father over money. As Tyson was brought into the courtroom, shackled and flanked by officers, Frida's composure cracked. "You'll get through this," she whispered to herself, her voice barely audible. "You didn't raise a killer, Frida. You know the truth." Tyson stood before the judge, his head held high despite the whispers that rippled through the room. The world already seemed to have made up its mind about him, but Tyson's steady gaze spoke of a determination that wouldn't waver. The courtroom buzzed with hushed whispers as the judge's gavel slammed against the block. "Order in the court," the judge demanded, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. All eyes turned to the defendant, Tyson Smith, a 21-year-old black man with shackles on his wrists. He stood tall, his face etched with defiance and disbelief. "Tyson Smith," the judge began, his tone grave, "you have been found guilty of the murder of your father, Donald Smith." Gasps echoed through the packed room. In the front row, Frida Smith, Tyson's mother, clutched a tissue in her trembling hands. Her world spun as the words hit her like a sledgehammer. Donald Smith, a wealthy white businessman, had been her husband, and the father of the young man now condemned. "I didn't do it," Tyson shouted, his voice cracking. "I swear to God, I didn't kill him." The bailiffs moved quickly, gripping Tyson's arms and pulling him toward the exit. He struggled against them, turning his head to find his mother in the sea of faces. "Mom, you know I didn't do this." Frida stood shakily, her knees buckling beneath her. "I know, baby. I know," she whispered, her voice drowned out by the murmurs of the crowd. Then, as if the weight of the moment was too much, Frida clutched her chest, gasping for air. "Mom!" Tyson screamed, panic replacing his defiance. The courtroom erupted in chaos as Frida collapsed to the floor, clutching her chest. Paramedics were called, and as they rushed her out on a stretcher, Tyson's cries echoed through the halls. The judge's voice rose above the commotion. "This court is adjourned." The gavel slammed once more, silencing the chaos, but the damage had already been done. Tyson was led out of the courtroom in chains, his fate sealed. His last view of his mother was through the small glass window of the courtroom door as she disappeared down the hallway, surrounded by medics. The whispers resumed as the crowd dispersed. Some spoke of the tragedy of Donald Smith's death, others debated Tyson's guilt. But for Frida and Tyson, the truth was clear. He was innocent. And somewhere in the shadows of wealth and betrayal, the real murderer remained free. Months before the courtroom drama, the Smith family appeared to be living a life of luxury and privilege. Donald Smith, a wealthy businessman in his late 50s, was a man who believed he could have everything: wealth, power, and even love on his own terms. But beneath the surface of his opulent home, tensions simmered like a pot ready to boil over. Frida Smith, Donald's first wife and the mother of his only child, Tyson, carried herself with quiet dignity. A black woman with a sharp mind and a warm heart, she had stood by Donald through the early days of his career, raising Tyson and building a family. But as Donald's fortune grew, so did the cracks in their marriage. Enter Samantha, Donald's second wife, a young, beautiful white woman whose charm masked a deeply manipulative nature. Samantha had entered the Smith household as an employee but quickly caught Donald's eye. Before long, she had become his wife, much to Frida's dismay. While Donald claimed there was enough room in his heart and estate for both women, Samantha made it clear she had no intention of sharing. "I'm not here to take your place," Samantha said one day, her tone sugary sweet but her eyes sharp as daggers. "But I am Donald's wife now, and I think it's time we redefine the household roles." Frida narrowed her eyes, refusing to rise to the bait. "I have no interest in competing with you, Samantha," she replied evenly. "But let me make one thing clear. Tyson and I are Donald's family, and we always will be." Samantha's smile didn't falter, but resentment burned behind her perfect facade. She saw Frida as a relic of Donald's past, and Tyson as a threat to her future. With Donald hinting that Tyson might inherit a large portion of his fortune, Samantha began plotting ways to secure her position and eliminate her competition. In the months that followed, the household became a battlefield. Samantha used every opportunity to undermine Frida and Tyson. She whispered lies into Donald's ear, planting seeds of doubt about Tyson's loyalty and Frida's intentions. At the same time, she worked to gain Donald's trust, positioning herself as his closest confidant. Tyson, however, saw through her games. "She's playing you, Dad," he said one evening during dinner. "Samantha only cares about your money." Donald dismissed his son's concerns with a wave of his hand. "Tyson, you need to give Samantha a chance. She's part of this family now." Tyson's frustration grew, but he bit his tongue for Frida's sake. Frida, too, kept quiet, though she noticed how Samantha's influence over Donald grew stronger every day. Despite her instincts, she held out hope that Donald would see the truth before it was too late. But Samantha's patience was wearing thin. She wasn't content to wait for Donald's inheritance to pass naturally. She wanted control, immediate and complete, and she was willing to do whatever it took to get it. In the quiet corners of the Smith mansion, Samantha began to lay the foundation of a plan that would soon destroy the family. The tension in the Smith household reached new heights one late summer evening. The golden glow of the setting sun filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the sprawling estate, casting long shadows in the quiet corridors. Tyson had just returned from a jog, his athletic frame still glistening with sweat as he headed toward the kitchen for a glass of water. "Samantha," Tyson replied coldly, not bothering to look at her as he opened the fridge. "What do you want?" She stepped closer, her heels clicking softly against the tiled floor. "You've been so tense lately," she cooed. "I just wanted to ease things between us. We don't have to be at odds, you know." Tyson straightened and turned to face her, his eyes narrowing. What are you talking about? Samantha smiled, slow and deliberate, as she placed a manicured hand on his arm. I know how hard it must be for you, living in your father's shadow, feeling like you're always second best. But you don't have to be. Her hand slid up toward his shoulder. We could help each other. I could make things easier for you. Tyson stepped back, pulling his arm out of her grasp. His face twisted in a mixture of shock and disgust. Are you serious right now? Oh, come on, she said, her voice dropping to a husky whisper. We're both adults here. Donald doesn't have to know. Besides, he's so distracted these days. Tyson's jaw clenched as he fought to keep his temper in check. Let me make something clear, Samantha, he said, his voice steady but firm. I don't want anything to do with you. You're my father's wife. Whatever you're trying to pull here, it's disgusting. Samantha's playful smile vanished, replaced by a look of cold fury. Disgusting? She hissed, stepping closer. Do you have any idea who you're talking to? You think you can talk to me like that and get away with it? Tyson held his ground, his expression unyielding. I'm not afraid of you, Samantha. Stay away from me. And stay away from my mom. For a moment, Samantha stood frozen, her cheeks burning with humiliation. But as Tyson walked away, the anger in her eyes deepened into something far more dangerous. Her fingers tightened into fists at her sides, and she whispered under her breath, "You'll regret this." In that moment, Samantha's mind began to spin with possibilities. Tyson had made himself an enemy, and Samantha had no intention of letting him stand in the way of her ambitions. If she couldn't manipulate him, she would destroy him. And if Frida had to fall with him, so be it. As she retreated to her room, Samantha's plan began to take shape. Tyson would pay for rejecting her, and she would make sure it was a price he could never recover from. The Smith family gathered in the grand dining room one crisp autumn evening. The long mahogany table was set with fine china, and the room was filled with the warm glow of the chandelier overhead. It was one of the rare occasions where Donald insisted the entire family dine together. I want us to put aside our differences, Donald said, his voice firm but kind, as he raised his glass for a toast. Family is everything, and no matter what, we must stick together. Tyson exchanged a skeptical glance with Frida, who gave him a reassuring nod. Across the table, Samantha smiled sweetly, but her eyes betrayed a cold calculation. She was playing the role of the dutiful wife perfectly, but her thoughts were already 2 steps ahead. The dinner proceeded with polite conversation, though an undercurrent of tension lingered. As the plates were cleared and dessert was served, Donald suddenly paused, his fork clattering onto his plate. He gripped the edge of the table, his face contorting in pain. Donald! Frida's voice was filled with concern as she leaned forward. Are you all right? I don't feel, Donald stammered, his hand clutching his chest. His breathing grew labored, and he collapsed onto the table, sending the glassware crashing to the floor. Call an ambulance, Tyson shouted, leaping to his feet. Frida rushed to Donald's side, tears streaming down her face as she tried to steady him. Samantha, seated across from Donald, froze for a moment, her eyes wide. But instead of panic, a flicker of satisfaction crossed her face before she quickly masked it with a performance of hysteria. "Oh my God, Donald!" she screamed, running to his side and clinging to his arm. "What's happening? Someone do something." The paramedics arrived within minutes, but it was too late. Donald was pronounced dead on the spot, and the once vibrant dining room became a scene of chaos and grief. The days following Donald's death were a whirlwind. The official cause of death was listed as a heart attack, but whispers of foul play began to surface. Samantha's performance as the grieving widow was flawless. She wept during interviews with the media and organized a grand funeral, ensuring every detail painted her as a devoted wife devastated by her husband's untimely demise. Behind the scenes, however, Samantha worked to subtly shift suspicion toward Tyson. She mentioned to the police that Tyson and Donald had a heated argument a few days before the dinner. "He's been so angry with his father lately," she said tearfully. "I just hope this wasn't. I don't even want to think about it." The planted seeds began to take root. The police started questioning Tyson's motives, while Samantha continued her charade of sorrow. To Frida, Samantha's grief seemed rehearsed, but she couldn't prove it. She clung to the belief that the truth would eventually come out. Unbeknownst to the family, Samantha's plan was already in motion. She had poisoned Donald's drink that night, carefully calculating the dosage to mimic a heart attack. Now, all she needed to do was ensure Tyson took the fall for the crime, and she would have the wealth and power she had craved all along. The day after Donald's funeral, Samantha was already hard at work setting her trap. In the privacy of her room, she carefully packed a small vial of poison into a plastic bag, slipping on gloves to ensure her fingerprints wouldn't be found. Her lips curled into a smile as she placed the bag inside a gym bag she had stolen from Tyson's room. "This has to look perfect," she murmured to herself, glancing at her phone where she had prepared a series of fake text messages. She had used an app to mimic Tyson's number, crafting a fictional argument between him and Donald about the family's inheritance. The messages read, "Tyson, you can't cut me out of what's mine. Donald, you need to earn it, not demand it. Tyson, you'll regret this, Dad. Watch yourself." Satisfied, Samantha sent the fake messages to her own phone, making sure the timestamps aligned with the day before Donald's death. Her story was now airtight, or so she believed. That evening, Samantha invited the police back to the house under the guise of providing them with more information about Donald's final hours. Clutching a tissue and keeping her voice shaky, she recounted the supposed argument between Tyson and Donald, dropping hints of Tyson's growing anger. "I hate to say this," Samantha said, dabbing at her eyes, "but Tyson was so upset with Donald about the inheritance. They argued the night before he died. Tyson even threatened him. I didn't want to believe he'd hurt his own father, but—" The detective leaned forward. "Do you have any proof of this?" Reluctantly, Samantha handed over her phone. "These texts. I didn't want to show anyone, but I couldn't live with myself if I didn't help find the truth." The detective read the messages, his brows furrowing. "This doesn't look good," he admitted. "We'll need to search Tyson's belongings." Samantha's lips twitched into a barely noticeable smile. "Of course," she said. "I just want justice for my husband." The search of Tyson's room happened the next morning. Frida stood in the hallway, horrified, as officers tore through her son's belongings. "You have no right," she protested. "Tyson didn't do anything." "Ma'am, we have a warrant," one officer said curtly, pulling open Tyson's gym bag. He froze, holding up the plastic bag containing the vial of poison. "What's this?" "That's not his," Frida shouted, stepping forward, but the officer ignored her. "Looks like we've got motive and means," the lead detective said, nodding to his partner. "Arrest him." By the time Tyson returned home that afternoon, the police were waiting for him. "Tyson Smith, you're under arrest for the murder of Donald Smith," they announced, handcuffing him on the spot. "This is insane," Tyson yelled, struggling against their grip. "I didn't kill my father." Frida tried to intervene, but Samantha stood in the doorway, her expression a perfect mixture of sorrow and fear. "I'm sorry, Tyson," she said softly, loud enough for the officers to hear. But the truth had to come out. As Tyson was dragged away, Frida turned to Samantha, her eyes blazing with rage. "You did this," she hissed. "I don't know how, but I'll prove it." Samantha simply smiled faintly and closed the door behind her. Inside, she poured herself a glass of wine, her hands steady and her heart calm. Tyson was out of the way, and her path to Donald's fortune was now clear. The stillness of the night was shattered by the sharp knock at the Smith family's front door. Frida awoke with a start, her heart pounding as she glanced at the clock. 2:17 a.m. The sound came again, louder and more insistent. "Police! Open up!" a voice barked from outside. Frida hurried to the door, tying her robe tightly around her. As she opened it, the cold night air rushed in, along with the sight of several officers standing on the porch, their faces grim and serious. "Mrs. Smith, we have a warrant for Tyson Smith's arrest," the lead officer said, holding up a document. His voice was devoid of empathy, the weight of the words crashing into her like a wave. "What?" Frida gasped, her voice trembling. "Arrest? For what?" What's going on? Before she could get an answer, Tyson appeared at the top of the stairs, rubbing his eyes. Mom? What's happening? He asked, his voice groggy with sleep. Tyson Smith, the officer called up. You're under arrest for the murder of your father, Donald Smith. Tyson froze, his face a mask of disbelief. What? No, this has to be a mistake. I didn't. The officers moved quickly, storming up the stairs and grabbing Tyson by the arms. Frida's protests filled the house as they forced her son down the steps, placing him in handcuffs. Wait, you can't do this, Frida cried, standing between Tyson and the door. He didn't do anything. My son would never hurt his father. Ma'am, step aside, one of the officers said firmly, but Frida refused, her body trembling as she tried to block their path. Mom, Tyson said softly, his voice calm despite the chaos. It's okay. Don't fight them. We'll sort this out. No, it's not okay, Frida yelled, tears streaming down her face. This is wrong. The officers pulled Tyson through the doorway and out into the yard, where flashing red and blue lights illuminated the neighborhood. Sleepy neighbors peeked through their windows and doorways, their whispers adding fuel to the fire. Did you hear? Tyson killed his father. Frida always seemed so nice. Who would have thought? Rich families always have skeletons. Samantha stood a few houses away, pretending to be a concerned onlooker. Her arms were folded tightly across her chest, her face painted with a mask of quiet grief. She whispered to one of the neighbors, I tried to warn them. Tyson was so angry at Donald lately. I didn't want to believe it, but the seeds of doubt she had planted blossomed as the community turned against Tyson. By the time the police car drove away, Frida was left standing alone on her porch, clutching the doorframe for support, her cries lost in the night. In the back of the patrol car, Tyson stared out the window, his jaw clenched. He wasn't just fighting for his freedom now. He was fighting to prove that he wasn't the monster Samantha had painted him to be. The morning after Tyson's arrest, the headlines broke like a storm across every news channel and tabloid. Wealthy businessman Donald Smith poisoned, son arrested for murder. Tyson's mugshot, a photo of him looking dazed and defiant, was plastered across TV screens and newspapers. The narrative was already set, painting him as a greedy, ungrateful son consumed by jealousy and entitlement. Reporters camped outside Frida's home, bombarding her with questions every time she stepped outside. Mrs. Smith, did you know about your son's plot to kill his father? One shouted. Is it true your son was angry about being cut out of the will? Yelled another. Frida ignored them, her face drawn with exhaustion and grief. Meanwhile, Samantha stepped into the spotlight, granting exclusive interviews to high-profile networks. Seated in her lavish living room, draped in black and clutching a tissue, she played the role of the grieving widow to perfection. I never imagined Tyson could do something like this, she said tearfully to one interviewer. He and Donald had been arguing so much lately about money. Donald was such a kind and generous man, and I just don't understand how his own son could betray him like this. The interviewer leaned forward, her voice gentle but probing. Do you think Frida knew about Tyson's plans? Samantha hesitated, her eyes filling with carefully placed tears. I don't want to accuse anyone, but Frida was always protective of Tyson. I wouldn't be surprised if she turned a blind eye to what he was doing. The soundbites spread like wildfire, solidifying Samantha's narrative. The public quickly turned against Tyson and Frida, branding them as schemers who had tried to take advantage of Donald's wealth. Social media erupted with hateful comments, further isolating Frida and tarnishing Tyson's name. In the court of public opinion, Tyson was already guilty, and Samantha was the tragic victim. The trial began under a media frenzy. The courtroom was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. Frida sat in the front row, her hands clenched tightly together, as Tyson was led into the courtroom in an orange jumpsuit. Despite his composed demeanor, Frida could see the weight of the accusations in her son's tired eyes. The prosecution wasted no time painting Tyson as a cold-blooded killer. They presented the poison found in his gym bag as the murder weapon and highlighted the staged text messages Samantha had fabricated. The evidence is clear, the prosecutor declared. Tyson Smith resented his father's authority and killed him for financial gain. When Samantha took the stand, she delivered a performance so convincing that even Frida felt a flicker of doubt. Samantha wept openly, recounting the supposed argument she had overheard between Donald and Tyson. He said things like, "You'll regret this," Samantha sobbed. Donald just wanted what was best for Tyson, but he couldn't see it. The jury watched Samantha intently, clearly moved by her words. Every tear she shed seemed to cement Tyson's guilt further in their minds. When it was the defense's turn, Tyson's lawyer struggled to counter the mountain of fabricated evidence. The planted texts, the poison, and Samantha's emotional testimony were too damning. Tyson took the stand, maintaining his innocence with quiet determination. "I didn't kill my father," he said firmly. "I loved him. He was everything to me." But his words fell on deaf ears. The jury had already been swayed by the overwhelming narrative constructed by Samantha and the prosecution. Even some of Frida's closest friends began to doubt Tyson's innocence, avoiding her in public and whispering behind her back. When the prosecution delivered their closing argument, it was clear the case was lost. "Tyson Smith is a man who let greed and jealousy consume him," the prosecutor said. "He took the life of the very man who gave him everything. Justice must be served." As the trial drew to a close, Frida could only pray for a miracle. But deep down, she feared the worst. The courtroom was suffocatingly silent as the jury filed back in, their faces grave. Frida sat in the front row, her hands gripping the edge of her seat. Tyson stood tall but pale, his shoulders squared as he faced the verdict. The judge cleared his throat. "Has the jury reached a decision?" The foreman stood, holding a folded piece of paper. "We have, Your Honor." The tension in the room was unbearable as the foreman unfolded the paper and read aloud. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tyson Smith, guilty of the murder of Donald Smith." Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by a low murmur. Frida froze, her world crashing down around her. Tyson's jaw tightened, but he kept his gaze steady. "I didn't do it," he whispered under his breath, shaking his head in disbelief. The judge's gavel came down, silencing the room. "Tyson Smith, you are hereby sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole." "No," Frida cried, standing abruptly. Her voice broke through the quiet like glass shattering. "You're wrong. My son is innocent." The bailiffs moved toward Tyson, handcuffing him as Frida stumbled forward, desperate to reach her son. "Tyson, you didn't do this. I'll fix it, I promise." Her cries grew louder as Tyson was led away, his eyes glistening with restrained tears. "Mom, don't do this to yourself," he said quietly. "I'll be okay." But Frida wasn't okay. The strain of the moment overwhelmed her. She clutched her chest, her breathing shallow. "Mom!" Tyson shouted as Frida collapsed to the floor. Chaos erupted as paramedics were called, rushing Frida out of the courtroom on a stretcher. Tyson, still restrained, struggled against the bailiffs, his voice echoing through the halls. "Let me go. That's my mother. Mom." As the courtroom emptied, Samantha sat in the back row, dabbing at fake tears. Beneath her veil of grief, a satisfied smirk tugged at her lips. Everything was going exactly as she had planned. With Frida in critical condition and Tyson locked away, Samantha wasted no time seizing control of Donald's estate. Armed with a convincing facade of grief and her legal marriage to Donald, she swiftly gained access to his bank accounts and properties. Her first act was to liquidate Frida's share of the estate, citing financial mismanagement and Frida's absence due to her health. She sold off assets, pocketing the profits, and funneled large sums into secret offshore accounts. "It's what Donald would have wanted," she told the lawyers with a practiced, tearful expression. Samantha's newfound wealth fueled her lavish lifestyle. She threw extravagant parties under the guise of charity events in Donald's memory, buying loyalty and admiration from those who mattered. Behind closed doors, she relished her victory, sipping champagne in the same dining room where Donald had met his end. But Samantha wasn't done. Her ambition was insatiable. She began positioning herself as a socialite with plans to expand her influence, scheming to marry into even greater wealth and power. The Smith family name, once Frida and Tyson's legacy, now served as her stepping stone. In her mind, she had one. Frida was incapacitated, Tyson was forgotten, and the world believed her lies. But as Samantha celebrated her triumph, she remained oblivious to the cracks forming in her carefully constructed empire. The truth, though buried deep, had a way of clawing its way to the surface. The cold, gray walls of the prison closed in on Tyson as he was led to his cell. The clang of the heavy door locking behind him felt like the final seal on his fate. His cellmate, a gruff man with tattoos covering his arms, gave him a cursory glance before turning back to his cot. Tyson sat on the edge of the metal bunk, his head in his hands. The days blurred together in a routine of survival. Tyson quickly learned the unspoken rules of prison life. Avoid unnecessary eye contact, watch your back, and never show weakness. He endured threats, fights, and long stretches of isolation. Nights were the hardest. Alone in the darkness, Tyson replayed the events leading to his conviction, anger and despair gnawing at him. But deep inside, Tyson refused to give up. "I'm not staying here forever," he whispered to himself one night, staring at the cracks in the ceiling. "I didn't kill my father, and I'm going to prove it." That determination grew stronger after he met Mr. Malcolm, an older inmate who had spent decades behind bars. Malcolm had earned a reputation for his wisdom and calm demeanor, becoming a mentor to younger inmates. One day, Malcolm found Tyson in the library, sifting through legal books. "Looking for something?" Malcolm asked, pulling up a chair. "Answers," Tyson replied, his tone flat. "If the system got me here, maybe I can find a way out." Malcolm chuckled lightly. "That's a good place to start. But if you're serious, you've got to understand how this system works. They don't play fair, so you'll need to be smarter." From that day on, Tyson immersed himself in studying law. Malcolm guided him, pointing out key cases and strategies. Tyson's despair slowly transformed into a focused drive. Every page he read was a step closer to proving his innocence. He vowed that one day, he would walk out of the prison gates a free man, no matter how long it took. Frida lay in her hospital bed, the steady beep of the heart monitor filling the room. Her body was weak, but her spirit burned with fierce determination. She clutched a framed photo of Tyson, her fingers trembling. "I'm not giving up on you," she whispered. "Not now, not ever." With the help of her close friend, Anita, Frida began researching attorneys known for fighting wrongful convictions. One name stood out: Marcus Reed, a tenacious civil rights lawyer with a reputation for taking on impossible cases. Despite her limited resources, Frida reached out to him, pouring her heart into a letter about Tyson's case. A week later, Marcus visited her at the hospital. Tall and sharp-eyed, he exuded confidence as he sat by her bedside. "Mrs. Smith," he said, "I've read everything you sent me, and I believe your son is innocent." Frida's eyes welled with tears. "Thank you," she whispered. "I know he didn't do it. I just need someone to believe in him." Marcus nodded. "We're going to fight this. But I'll be honest, it won't be easy. The evidence against Tyson is strong, and the people who framed him will do everything to keep the truth buried." "I don't care how hard it is," Frida said, her voice firm despite her frailty. "I'll do whatever it takes to bring my son home." Marcus began investigating immediately. He pored over court transcripts, forensic reports, and witness testimonies. The more he dug, the more inconsistencies he found. "Something's not adding up," he told Frida during one of their meetings. This wasn't just negligence, it was deliberate. As Frida recovered, her strength returned alongside her resolve. She attended every meeting, helped Marcus gather information, and never let herself falter. "They may have taken everything from us," she said, "but we're going to take it back." Together, Frida and Marcus lit the first spark in what would become a blazing fight for justice. Marcus Reed's investigation led him to a long-forgotten detail in the case files: a former housekeeper named Clara Jenkins, who had worked for the Smith family up until a few weeks before Donald's death. Her abrupt resignation had been glossed over during the trial, dismissed as irrelevant. But Marcus knew there was more to the story. Tracking Clara down wasn't easy. She had moved to a small town and avoided all contact with the Smith family after leaving her job. When Marcus finally found her, She was reluctant to speak. "I don't want any trouble," she said, glancing nervously out the window of her modest apartment. "You won't be in trouble," Marcus assured her. "But Tyson Smith is serving a life sentence for a crime he didn't commit. If you know anything, you could help save an innocent man." Clara hesitated before finally nodding. "I don't know everything, but I do know Samantha isn't who she pretends to be." She recounted a chilling memory. One evening, she had overheard Samantha arguing with Donald in his study. "You think I'm going to sit here and let you give everything to your brat and his mother?" Samantha had shouted. "I've worked too hard for this, Donald. If you don't do what I want, I'll make sure you regret it." Clara admitted she had quit shortly after because of Samantha's increasingly volatile behavior. "She made me feel unsafe," Clara said, her voice trembling. "And the way she looked at Mr. Smith sometimes, like she hated him." Marcus pressed her for more details and recorded her statement. Clara's testimony was a game-changer. It provided a motive and established Samantha's capacity for threats and manipulation. "You've done the right thing," Marcus told her. "This could be what we need to reopen Tyson's case." With Clara's testimony in hand, Marcus shifted his focus to the poison used in Donald's death. The forensic report from the trial identified the substance as thallium, a rare but lethal toxin. Marcus knew that if he could trace its purchase, he might find a direct link to Samantha. After weeks of digging through financial records and online transactions, Marcus hit pay dirt. Samantha had used a pseudonym to purchase a vial of thallium from an online retailer just a month before Donald's death. The delivery address matched a private post office box Samantha had rented without Donald's knowledge. Marcus cross-referenced the dates and noticed something even more damning. The poison had been purchased just days after Samantha had discovered Donald was updating his will to favor Frida and Tyson. This wasn't just premeditated, Marcus muttered to himself. It was calculated. To strengthen his case, Marcus consulted a toxicology expert who confirmed that the symptoms Donald exhibited, sudden chest pain, convulsions, and respiratory failure, were consistent with thallium poisoning. The expert also pointed out that the dosage Samantha had purchased matched the amount found in Donald's system. "This is the break we've been waiting for," Marcus told Frida during a late-night meeting. "We can tie Samantha directly to the murder weapon." Frida's eyes filled with hope for the first time in months. "Then let's take her down," she said, her voice steady. "For Tyson. For Donald. For everything she's taken from us." With the housekeeper's testimony and the poison trail, Marcus was finally ready to challenge the conviction that had stolen Tyson's freedom. The walls around Samantha's lies were beginning to crumble, and the fight for justice was gaining momentum. Samantha's arrogance grew alongside her newfound wealth. With Donald's estate under her control, she indulged in an extravagant lifestyle that raised eyebrows even among her closest confidants. Lavish shopping sprees, luxury vacations, and high-stakes gambling became her routine. But while the public saw Samantha's spending as part of her grieving process, Marcus Reed saw it as something much darker. During his investigation, Marcus obtained financial records through a subpoena. What he found confirmed his suspicions. Samantha had funneled millions of dollars into offshore accounts under fake names. Large sums had been transferred to secret trusts shortly after Donald's death, and several properties had been sold without Frida's or Tyson's knowledge. "These transfers don't just show greed," Marcus explained to Frida during one of their meetings. "They show intent." She was securing the money before anyone could challenge her. Frida listened intently, her face hard with determination. She didn't just want Donald's money, she said. She wanted to destroy anyone who stood in her way. Me, Tyson, all of us. As Marcus dug deeper, he uncovered a pattern. Samantha's financial moves were timed precisely to coincide with Tyson's arrest and trial, suggesting she had planned to shift blame and remove any competition for Donald's estate. This evidence not only painted Samantha as manipulative, but also strengthened the case against her. "She's sloppy," Marcus said. "Her arrogance will be her downfall." While Marcus worked tirelessly on the outside, Tyson's resolve strengthened behind bars. The letters he exchanged with Marcus became a lifeline, allowing him to contribute to his defense and share details he hadn't revealed before. In one of these letters, Tyson described a chilling moment with Samantha just weeks before Donald's death. "She cornered me in the kitchen," Tyson wrote, his words sharp with anger. She made it clear what she wanted. Me. She tried to seduce me, and when I rejected her, she said I'd regret it. Tyson went on to detail several instances where Samantha had insinuated an affair between them. She even hinted at it in front of Dad once, he wrote, but I shut it down every time. These letters became crucial evidence. Marcus compiled them into a timeline, connecting Tyson's rejection of Samantha's advances to her escalating actions against him. This isn't just about greed, Marcus noted during a strategy meeting. This is personal. She wanted revenge when Tyson didn't give her what she wanted. Marcus presented these letters to a handwriting expert to authenticate Tyson's account, ensuring their validity in court. The letters were a turning point, disproving Samantha's earlier claims that Tyson had been emotionally unstable and at odds with Donald. Instead, they revealed a young man who had been steadfast in his values despite immense pressure. These letters show Tyson's truth, Marcus told Frida. They're more than just words. They're a weapon we can use to dismantle Samantha's lies. With Tyson's perspective woven into the case, Marcus felt the foundation of Samantha's scheme beginning to crumble. The truth was finally coming to light, and the fight for justice had never been stronger. The tide began to shift the moment Marcus Reed went public with his findings. During a televised press conference, he laid out the evidence against Samantha in meticulous detail. The testimony of the former housekeeper, Clara Jenkins, the trail of poison purchases linked to Samantha, and the financial records showing her reckless spending and secret accounts. This is more than a miscarriage of justice, Marcus declared, his voice resolute. This is a calculated scheme to frame an innocent man, Tyson Smith, while the true perpetrator remains free. It's time for the truth to prevail. The press conference sent shockwaves through the media. News outlets that had once vilified Tyson now began questioning the original narrative. Headlines shifted from "Son murders wealthy father" to "Evidence suggests widow framed son for murder." Social media exploded with calls for Tyson's release. Activists organized rallies outside the courthouse, carrying signs that read "Free Tyson" and "Justice for the Smith family." Videos of Frida speaking passionately about her son's innocence went viral, inspiring empathy and outrage. Samantha's carefully curated image of the grieving widow began to crumble under the weight of public doubt. Former supporters started distancing themselves, and whispers of her involvement in Donald's death became louder. For the first time, Samantha felt the walls closing in around her. The mounting pressure pushed Samantha to her breaking point. Desperate to silence the growing accusations, she tried to bribe Clara Jenkins, the housekeeper whose testimony had been instrumental in exposing her lies. Clara received an unexpected visit from one of Samantha's associates, who offered her an envelope stuffed with cash. "All you have to do is retract your statement," the associate said with a practiced smile. "Say you were confused or misremembered. This could all go away." But Clara, emboldened by Marcus's support and her own conscience, refused. "I'm not lying for her," she said firmly, slamming the door in the associate's face. Samantha, realizing that subtlety was no longer working, resorted to more direct threats. She called Marcus late one evening, her voice icy. "You're playing a dangerous game, Mr. Reed," she warned. "Keep pushing and you'll regret it." Unfazed, Marcus recorded the call and forwarded it to law enforcement, further solidifying his case against her. "She's making it easier for us," he told Frida. "Every move she makes proves her guilt." The media caught wind of Samantha's bribes and threats, and the backlash was swift. Protesters chanted her name outside her mansion, demanding accountability. Sponsors pulled out of her so-called charity events, and even her closest allies began to abandon her. Cornered and panicking, Samantha retreated to her estate, where she watched her empire unravel from behind closed doors. The life she had built on lies was crumbling, and with each passing day, the truth grew closer to shattering her world completely. As Marcus dug deeper into Samantha's past, he uncovered a lead that could potentially break the case wide open. Evan Clark, a man who had once been romantically involved with Samantha before her marriage to Donald. Marcus learned that Evan had fallen out with Samantha years ago, but the details of their split had remained murky. Tracking Evan down wasn't easy, but Marcus eventually located him in a small town, living a quiet life far from the chaos of Samantha's schemes. When Marcus approached him, Evan was hesitant. "I don't want to get involved," he said, his voice cautious. "Samantha's trouble. Always has been. But you know something, don't you?" Marcus pressed. "Something that could help prove Tyson Smith's innocence." Evan sighed, running a hand through his hair. "We dated for a while, and I saw sides of her that no one else did. She's dangerous, manipulative. She'll do whatever it takes to get what she wants." Reluctantly, Evan recounted a drunken argument he had with Samantha shortly after Donald's death. She was ranting about how she had to clean up Donald's mess and how Tyson was too stupid to see it coming. At one point, she let it slip that she used poison to take care of Donald and framed Tyson to tie up loose ends. Evan hesitated before adding, "I didn't take her seriously at the time. Thought it was just drunk talk. But now, it all makes sense." Marcus recorded Evan's statement and verified his story with receipts and correspondence that placed Samantha and Evan together during the time frame of Donald's death. The testimony was damning. Not only did it establish her motive and actions, but it also showed her outright admission of guilt. "You've just given us the key to this case," Marcus told Evan. "Thank you." As the evidence against her mounted, Samantha's world began to implode. The once confident socialite, who had commanded sympathy and admiration, now found herself the target of public outrage. Reporters camped outside her mansion, bombarding her with questions about the poison trail, the housekeeper's testimony, and now Evan Clark's revelations. In a desperate bid to salvage her image, Samantha agreed to a live televised interview. But the decision would prove disastrous. Dressed in black and seated in a lavish room adorned with photos of her and Donald, Samantha tried to exude composure. "I've been through so much," she began, her voice trembling. "Losing Donald was the hardest thing I've ever faced, and now people are trying to destroy my reputation." But as the interviewer pressed her on the mounting evidence, Clara's testimony, the poison trail, and Evan's claims, Samantha's mask began to crack. Her responses grew defensive, her voice rising with each question. "This is a witch hunt," she snapped. "Everyone's out to get me. Marcus Reed, that liar Clara, even Donald's ungrateful son. They're all conspiring against me." Her erratic behavior shocked viewers. She gestured wildly, her voice breaking as she accused Tyson and Frida of orchestrating a smear campaign and claimed Evan was a jealous ex trying to ruin her. The interviewer tried to regain control, but Samantha was unraveling too quickly. The interview went viral within hours, with clips of her outburst flooding social media. Memes and hashtags like #SamanthaExposed and #GuiltyWidow trended worldwide, further tarnishing her credibility. Sponsors dropped her remaining ventures, and former allies publicly distanced themselves. By the end of the day, Samantha had gone into hiding, retreating behind the walls of her estate as the world turned against her. Her breakdown had only solidified what many now believed. Samantha wasn't a victim. She was the villain. The motion to reopen Tyson Smith's case sent shockwaves through the legal world. Armed with overwhelming evidence, Marcus Reed made his case in front of a skeptical judge. The courtroom was packed with reporters, activists, and supporters of Tyson, many holding signs that read "Justice for Tyson" and "Expose Samantha." "Your Honor," Marcus began, his voice steady, the evidence presented at the original trial was not just flawed. It was deliberately fabricated to frame an innocent man. "We have testimony, financial records, and new forensic findings that demand this case be reconsidered." The judge, a stern woman with a reputation for fairness, reviewed the stack of evidence Marcus had provided: Clara Jenkins' testimony, the trail of Samantha's poison purchase, Evan Clark's statement, and the timeline of Samantha's financial schemes. After a tense silence, she nodded. "Mr. Reed, you've presented compelling evidence. The motion to reopen the case is granted." The courtroom erupted in applause and cheers, but Marcus raised a hand to quiet them. The real fight was just beginning. As the retrial got underway, the media descended in full force. The story captivated the nation, with daily coverage dissecting every detail. Samantha's erratic behavior during her interview became a focal point, casting doubt on her previous testimony. Public opinion, once firmly against Tyson, now leaned heavily in his favor. "This isn't just about Tyson Smith," Marcus told reporters outside the courthouse. This is about exposing a system that allowed an innocent man to be condemned while the guilty walked free. Inside the courtroom, Samantha sat stone-faced, her once flawless composure replaced with visible tension. The walls of her lies were closing in, and she could feel it. On the third day of the retrial, Tyson took the stand. Dressed in a sharp suit, he looked every bit the determined young man who had spent years fighting for his freedom. The courtroom fell silent as he began to speak. "I've been called a lot of things over the past few years," Tyson said, his voice steady. "A murderer, a monster. But none of that is true. I didn't kill my father, and I'm here today to tell you what really happened." Tyson recounted his relationship with his father, describing the respect and love he had for the man who had raised him. "My dad and I didn't always agree," he admitted, "but I never wanted to harm him. He was my family." When Marcus asked about Samantha, Tyson's expression hardened. "She tried to manipulate me," he said. "She even tried to seduce me once. When I rejected her, she said I'd regret it. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now I see that it was a warning." The courtroom was riveted as Tyson described the events leading up to his arrest, including the discovery of the poison planted in his belongings and the fabricated text messages. His voice cracked with emotion as he spoke about the toll the conviction had taken on him and his mother. "They took everything from me," Tyson said, his eyes locking onto the jury. "My freedom, my reputation, my family. But I'm not asking for pity. I'm asking for the truth to come out. I'm asking for justice." The defense attempted to discredit Tyson's testimony, but his sincerity and composure left a powerful impression. Even some of Samantha's staunchest defenders in the gallery began to shift uncomfortably in their seats. By the time Tyson stepped down, the energy in the courtroom had shifted. The truth was no longer buried. It was breaking through, and Samantha's carefully constructed facade was beginning to crumble under its weight. The tension in the courtroom was palpable as Samantha Smith took the stand. Dressed in black, she sat with her chin held high, attempting to project an air of control. But her eyes betrayed the cracks in her facade. Fear and desperation flickered beneath her carefully composed exterior. Marcus Reed wasted no time during cross-examination. "Mrs. Smith," he began, pacing in front of her, "you've testified that Tyson was angry with his father and that you overheard him threatening Donald. Yet, we have no record of you reporting this supposed argument to the authorities until after Donald's death. Why is that?" Samantha fidgeted with the edge of her sleeve, her voice tight. I didn't think it was relevant at the time." "Not relevant?" Marcus pressed, his tone sharpening. "You claim to have heard a threat from the man you now accuse of murder, and you didn't think it was worth mentioning?" "I was in shock," Samantha snapped, her voice rising. "I didn't know what to do." Marcus leaned closer, his voice calm but relentless. "Mrs. Smith, are you in shock now? Because it seems like you've had plenty of time to fabricate your story." The gallery murmured, and the judge banged her gavel for order. Samantha's composure began to crack. Marcus didn't let up. "Let's talk about the poison," he continued, holding up evidence of her online purchase. "We have records showing you purchased thallium under a false name weeks before Donald's death. Care to explain that?" "That's a lie," Samantha shouted, her voice shrill. "You're twisting everything." Marcus walked to the jury box, letting her outburst settle. Then he turned back to her, his voice cutting through the silence. "Mrs. Smith, did you poison your husband?" Samantha's face contorted with rage and panic. "No," she yelled, then faltered. I didn't." "You didn't what?" Marcus pressed, stepping closer. "Didn't mean to? Didn't think you'd get caught?" "I had no choice," Samantha screamed, slamming her hands on the stand. The room froze. He was going to cut me off, give everything to Frida and Tyson, after everything I did for him. Realizing what she just said, Samantha's hand flew to her mouth. The courtroom erupted in gasps and murmurs. Marcus stepped back, his expression calm and victorious. "Thank you, Mrs. Smith. No further questions." Samantha slumped in her chair, her face pale as the weight of her words hung in the air. The judge banged the gavel, trying to restore order, but the shock of her confession lingered. The jury deliberated for only a few hours before returning with their decision. The courtroom was silent as the foreman stood and read the verdict. "We, the jury, find the defendant, Tyson Smith, not guilty on all charges." The words hit Tyson like a wave of relief. His shoulders sagged, and for the first time in years, he smiled. Across the room, Frida wept openly, her hands clasped in prayer. The courtroom erupted in cheers, the sound of justice finally served echoing through the halls. As Tyson was unshackled, he turned to Frida. She rushed to him, wrapping her arms around him tightly. "You're free, baby," she sobbed. "You're finally free." "I told you, Mom," Tyson whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "We'd get through this." Reporters outside the courthouse captured the moment as Tyson and Frida walked out together, surrounded by supporters chanting his name. Marcus Reed stood beside them, his job done, but his pride evident. Inside the courthouse, Samantha sat in stunned silence, flanked by officers ready to escort her away. She had been arrested on the spot for perjury, fraud, and the murder of Donald Smith. The life she had fought so hard to secure was gone, her empire reduced to ashes. For Tyson and Frida, the nightmare was over. As they stepped into the sunlight, Tyson inhaled deeply, savoring the air of freedom. This wasn't just an end. It was a new beginning. The courtroom was somber as the judge prepared to deliver Samantha Smith's sentence. The woman who had once commanded wealth and influence now stood as a convicted murderer and fraudster. Samantha's once meticulous appearance was gone. Her hair disheveled, her face pale, and her eyes hollow. The judge's voice was stern and resolute. "Samantha Smith, your actions were calculated, malicious, and devoid of remorse. You took a life, destroyed a family, and manipulated the justice system to serve your own greed. For the murder of Donald Smith, you are sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For fraud and perjury, you are sentenced to an additional 25 years, to be served consecutively." The courtroom was silent, save for Samantha's sharp intake of breath. Her knees buckled slightly as the gavel came down, sealing her fate. Outside, the public reaction was swift. Samantha's downfall became a national conversation, a cautionary tale of greed and betrayal. News outlets chronicled her rise and fall, dubbing her the widow with a poisonous heart. Former friends and allies distanced themselves, and her name became synonymous with corruption. For Tyson and Frida, the sentence marked the final chapter of their ordeal. Justice had been served, and the shadow Samantha had cast over their lives was finally lifted. Life after exoneration was a whirlwind for Tyson. He struggled at first, adjusting to a world that had moved on without him during his years in prison. But with the unwavering support of his mother, Frida, and the encouragement of Marcus Reed, he began to find his footing. Tyson decided to use his experience to make a difference. He started speaking at community events and universities, sharing his story to shed light on the flaws in the justice system. His heartfelt speeches resonated with audiences, inspiring others to fight for justice. But Tyson didn't stop there. With a newfound sense of purpose, he enrolled in law school, determined to become an advocate for those who had been wrongfully convicted. "If Marcus Reed could do it for me," he often said, "then I can do it for someone else." As he worked through his studies, Tyson also began collaborating with Marcus and Frida on establishing the Donald Smith Justice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing legal aid to underserved communities and fighting wrongful convictions. The foundation became a beacon of hope for countless individuals, turning the Smith family's tragedy into a force for good. For Tyson, every day was a step forward, a chance to rebuild his life and honor the memory of the father he had loved and lost. Through his work, he found healing, purpose, and redemption, proving that even in the darkest moments, resilience could light the way. Frida Smith, once a quiet and private woman, found herself at the center of a growing movement for justice reform. Empowered by her son's exoneration and the injustice they had endured, she began sharing her story at conferences, rallies, and community events. Standing before packed rooms, Frida's voice carried the weight of her pain and resilience. "I almost lost my son to a system that failed him," she said during one speech. "But I refused to stay silent. We must fight for those who can't fight for themselves." Frida's authenticity struck a chord with audiences. She partnered with legal organizations and advocacy groups to raise awareness about wrongful convictions and systemic biases. Her collaboration with the Donald Smith Justice Foundation became a cornerstone of her work, helping families navigate the complexities of the legal system. Through her efforts, Frida became a leading voice in the fight for justice reform. She lobbied for legislative changes, including mandatory reviews of cases involving questionable evidence and enhanced protections for defendants during interrogations. Her advocacy led to real change, making her a beacon of hope for families across the nation. "Every story matters," Frida often said, "and every voice has the power to change the world." The local community, once fractured by the controversy surrounding Tyson's case, began to come together in the aftermath of the retrial. Neighbors who had once whispered accusations and avoided the Smith family now reached out with apologies and offers of support. Churches organized events to celebrate Tyson's freedom, and local businesses pitched in to help the Smiths rebuild their lives. The community center hosted a fundraiser for the Donald Smith Justice Foundation, drawing a crowd that included people from all walks of life. During the event, Tyson addressed the crowd, his voice steady but emotional. "I used to think this community turned its back on me," he said. "But today, I see a community that is stronger because we've faced the truth together. Thank you for standing with us." Frida, watching from the front row, felt a deep sense of healing as the people around her embraced her family. The rift that had divided the community was slowly mending, replaced by a shared commitment to justice and understanding. A mural was commissioned in Tyson's honor, painted on the side of a local community center. It depicted him standing tall, surrounded by symbols of resilience and unity. Below it, the words, "Truth Prevails," were emblazoned as a reminder of their journey and the power of perseverance. The Smith family's story became a source of inspiration, a testament to the strength of a community that had learned to confront its past and move forward together. The Smith family's journey, marked by pain and perseverance, culminated in the creation of the Donald Smith Justice Foundation. With Tyson and Frida at the helm, the foundation aimed to provide legal aid to wrongfully convicted individuals and support families navigating the justice system. "It's not just about Tyson's story," Frida said during the foundation's launch event. "It's about creating a legacy of justice, compassion, and accountability. That's how we honor Donald's memory." The foundation quickly gained traction, drawing support from activists, legal professionals, and donors inspired by the Smith resilience. Programs were launched to offer pro bono legal representation, host educational workshops on legal rights, and fund investigations into questionable convictions. For Tyson, the foundation was deeply personal. "My father believed in fairness and integrity," he said during an interview. "This foundation is our way of ensuring his values live on, even in the face of what happened." Their efforts had a ripple effect, leading to the overturning of several wrongful convictions and providing hope to countless families. The foundation became a shining example of turning tragedy into action, solidifying the Smiths' place as champions of justice. On a crisp, sunny afternoon, Tyson stood on a stage before a crowd of thousands. The event, a celebration of justice reform, was held in the very community where his life had been turned upside down years ago. The audience included activists, lawyers, families of wrongfully convicted individuals, and supporters from all over the country. Tyson adjusted the microphone, his heart swelling as he looked out at the sea of faces. Behind him, a large banner displayed the words, "Justice for All, a Path Forward." Years ago, Tyson began, his voice steady. "I was standing in a courtroom, wrongly accused of a crime I didn't commit. I lost my freedom, my time, and almost my hope. But what I didn't lose was my belief in the truth, and in the people who fought for me." He paused, scanning the crowd. "Today, we stand here not just for me, but for every person who has been silenced, overlooked, or wronged by the system. Together, we are the proof that justice is possible." The crowd erupted in applause, but Tyson wasn't done. "This journey has taught me that resilience is a powerful thing, but so is community. None of us can fight alone, and none of you should have to." In the front row, Frida watched her son with tears in her eyes. She felt an overwhelming pride, not just for the man Tyson had become, but for the fight they had endured together. She knew that their story, though painful, had become a beacon of hope for others. As the event concluded, Tyson and Frida stood side by side, surrounded by supporters and well-wishers. It wasn't just the end of their story. It was the beginning of a new chapter, one defined by hope, justice, and the unwavering power of truth.
I hope you enjoyed the story. Please like and subscribe to the channel for more stories like this one. Thank you.